So today's webinar will be all around route setting. We just published our reopening guide, or addended our reopening guide to include some route setting specific guidance. And that effort was largely led by a new routesetting committee that the CWA started prior to the pandemic, who were instrumental in creating all of that info. A group from that committee are with us today to share their thoughts and answer any questions you guys might have. So as we start talking, feel free to just load up that question and answer box with questions. When we get to the question and answer portion, feel free to raise your hand if you have any thoughts you'd like to share. If we do unmute you, just make sure that you keep your comments to around 2 minutes or so. A lot of you guys are already using the chat, but when you do that, just make sure you select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your comments. As always, be polite and respectful of our panel. Keep any personal political commentary out of this, so no one should be slagging off on skate style setting or anything like that. And if anyone is abusive, then we'll remove you from the comments. Before we start into the route setting stuff, I was just going to give you guys a little update on our reopening survey results that just were published. We've been doing this as a monthly survey to track where people were heading with their reopening policies and which of those reopening policies they've instituted. So you guys can go and check that out for yourself. It's at the June reopening dashboard. Some of the notable things that I pulled out of that survey were kind of the economic state of the industry. It was a little rougher than we had hoped, and it looks like about 20% of people are pretty confident that they're not going to have any serious issues going through the next phase of the pandemic, however long that might last. But a good 80% of people are anywhere from unsure to really worried about what the future is going to hold for them. So we're going to stay on top of that and try to give you guys some information to help, especially those people that are unsure, try to get more sure one way or the other so you can start your planning and forecasting. So just stay tuned to future webinars and newsletter content. We're going to try to answer as many of those questions as we possibly can for you. The other nice thing to see out of that survey was that around over 90% of gyms haven't had any COVID cases reported in their facilities or even to their facilities, and those that did have people reporting things into the gym. As far as I know, nothing so far has been linked to being contracted inside of a gym. So pretty good results there overall. On a sadder note, we had another state in the U.S. close down, reclose yesterday. That's California. Where we stand right now, about 70% of gyms in North America are open, and probably a little bit more than that around the world right now. There's one state, North Carolina, that still has not reopened their gyms, and there's one province, Ontario, although just yesterday they announced that they will be reopening by Friday, I believe. And gyms should be included in that phase. So right now, California and Arizona just shut down, and there's no clear guidelines on when they might reopen. These are statewide closures. There are individual cities and counties that also are still remaining closed. That's why the number of open gyms is a little bit lower than the number of states and provinces that have allowed reopening. So yeah, there's probably many of you who are in states that have reopened, but your gym still can't just because of the city or county that you're in. So we're going to jump right into our route setting discussion, and I'll go ahead and have our panelists introduce themselves, let you know what gym they're calling from, and yeah, tell everyone a little bit about your background as well, perhaps. And so I'll call you guys out since we have a number of panelists today. I'll start with you, Cheech.
Hey everybody, my name's Cheech Lin. Well, Yo Chi Lin, but everyone just calls me Cheech. I've been setting for about 16 years now with First Descent in Chicago, and yeah, happy to be here.
Cool. And you're up next, Chris.
Hey guys, Chris Lacrasto here. I'm a route setter, 15 years, owner of Summit Climbing Gyms, as well as Premium Holds.
Cool. And I'll grab you next, Jackie.
Hey everybody, my name's Jackie Ethley. I've been a setter since 1998. Worked in commercial gyms primarily until a few years ago when I had to go full-time to Kilter, which is a hold company that I own part of. And I also work with the Routesetting Institute.
Awesome. And let's see, up next, grab you, Kasha.
Hi, my name's Kasha. I am the director of setting for Metro Rock climbing gyms. We have 5 locations, 3 in Boston, 1 in New York, and 1 in Vermont. And I've been in the climbing world for 20 plus years now.
Awesome. And after that, we got Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Filler. I've been setting for about 12 years now. I'm currently the head setter at The Spot in Boulder and Denver.
Cool. And last but not least, we got Ty.
Hey, this is Ty Foose. I'm Vice President of Product at Brooklyn Boulders. Been a route setter for about 30 years and a hold shaper for about 30 years. And excited to be here. Thanks, guys.
And, oh, no, I think we got, sorry, missed you, Jeremy. I'll let you get on there too.
No worries. My name is Jeremy Ho. I've been setting for about 12 years now. Currently unaffiliated with gyms. I was the director of route setting at Touchstone for 7 years.
Awesome. And yeah, just a reminder, so we'll jump into a little conversation here, but for all you guys in the audience, go ahead and start throwing questions into the question and answer tool. And the last half of the call, we'll get as many of those answered for you guys as possible. So yeah, as I mentioned, we started this Routesetting Committee to look at a number of different issues, and we reconvened during the pandemic to get some route setting guidance open and see what, keep track of what route setting is looking like as gyms reopen. And there's obviously a number of new challenges and distinct challenges, a lot of which we cover in the reopening guidance. For this call, I was going to have some of you panelists share how things have been looking in your route setting staff as you reopen. Some of the things we've touched on in the past around operations, or just the new challenges with limited staff and how you're managing the workflow. So yeah, let's start there. What if anyone could speak to how they're navigating working with less people and with these new restrictions in place as well. Maybe I'll grab, I think, yeah, I think you had an interesting perspective on this, Cheech, when we were talking the other day.
Sure. Right now, at First Ascent, we've got a limited team that are back, all full-time staff. There are 5 of us, and one strategy that we're employing to kind of increase distancing and minimize intermingling among cohorts is all our gyms in Chicago are closed 1 day a week, and all our setting is taking place on those days. And it's definitely an adjustment with the bulk of, well, all the route setting load falling on this small team. So I had to make sure that our work assignments and grade targets are adjusted accordingly, which kind of dovetails with making sure that we're adjusting things for our members as they're coming back. Also in there, as far as mitigating concerns with contamination on holds, we're using electrostatic misters to disinfect the gyms each night. Same sort of things that they're using on airlines. Yeah, that's a quick overview of what we're doing. Trying not setting 5 days a week. We're making sure we're getting breaks in there. Obviously, that would be definitely unsustainable and we'd all break down. But making sure that we're getting a good warm up beforehand, good stretching and warm up, cool down afterwards. Trying to, as best we can, follow the advice that as a group we've put out in these guidelines.
Yeah, and that's a great area to focus, and we cover it in the guidelines. Just that idea of reconditioning route setters and gym workers to get back to the same workloads before this. Can't really have the same forerunning and setting loads that people have had previously. Yeah. If anyone would like to speak to that idea of how you've retrained and reconditioned people to get back to work. See if you have any unique ideas.
I can say a few things. I'm from Summit. We started route setting before we were allowed to reopen, and we took that opportunity to strip all of the gyms, clean the holds, and we just route set for about a week before we even ran anything. And so those days of just getting back in the gym, moving ladders, putting holds on the wall, hauling things, sort of acted as a warm up in itself. And then once we had, 75% of the gym set, we started going back and running things. And so we were able to take that opportunity, if any of you guys are still closed, to not have to get the product on the wall and run in the same day. And it was a good kind of reintroduction for the route setters before they got back to actually climbing.
Yeah.
Something we did, we pretty much did the same thing as what Chris just said, but before we stripped everything, I had the setters come back in and kind of climb things that had been up from the 2 months or however long it was before we shut down, to kind of get adjust so where grades were at and how they were feeling and everything else. And that was pretty handy, and pretty much having the same grade and difficulty within all of our circuits.
Yeah, did anyone else there have a recalibration party or a work session to get people's heads back into grading and what your climbs were like before shutting down?
I think Sarah's spot on there. We've been cross-referencing some stuff that was up previously. We weren't able to get back into the gyms to set during the closures. But climbs that were still up that we felt were sort of benchmark or on for each grade, we definitely had to go through a recalibration process just so everyone could find out where they were at.
Cool. And what were your guys' general experiences with where your setting crews' heads were at going through that? Did people get back to the swing of things pretty quickly, or did it take a little while and talking through different movements and routes to kind of settle on a new normal there?
We kind of did the similar thing of how Chris mentioned, how we were able to set while the gyms were closed. So some of my setters actually kind of continued setting throughout the whole shutdown. It was the first 2 weeks of closure where nobody really went into the gyms, and then we just kept setting. So there's definitely some of my setters that are totally fine, to be honest. And then there's others that have recently returned, and they're just taking them time to readjust to how to do things. We were able to reset all the bouldering at all the gyms before we reopened. So now it's mostly just rope setting, and that's what they're kind of getting readjusted to, is just, where do I put my all my different tools on my harness? I don't remember how to do this anymore, type of thing. So they're definitely readjusting to that, but we don't really have we're not expecting them to set a lot. We're just expecting them to honestly just put up one route a day for now, just to get back into the swing of things.
Yeah. That's a great point, Kasha. How many of you guys went through an extra safety orientation or just job site orientation to get everyone reacquainted with all the equipment and tool placement and hauling things?
Yeah, all of our setters are going through a refresher on work at height and just kind of getting back into the swing of things and relearning how to be mindful with the safety protocols. And then additionally, we have another level of staff training that's just for all of the new coronavirus protocols.
Yeah, and the obvious extra layer there is all the new PPE for COVID protocols, in addition to whatever other measures you guys have instituted in your individual facilities. Have any of you guys seen any unique challenges to new PPE requirements with your setting crews? Or has it been pretty smooth overall?
I think the main challenge for us has been wearing the masks and having those on for, right now we're requiring them for running and for everything while the gym is open. So that has been the biggest challenge. The other thing that has has changed probably a little more significantly is cleaning of the holds, stripping and cleaning. We have, more robust rubber gloves that we're using for the stripping process, and then we're doing a bleach bath to soak all of our holds in, and then letting that dry before we do a power washing. And so we're trying to be very aware and adding some PPE throughout that process in terms of rubber gloves and a mask.
Communal use tools and bolt carts and things like that. Trying to remember to sanitize your hands before you go and touch everything that's in a cart that everybody else is going to touch. That's been just kind of constantly reminding everybody. If you see them not using the hand sanitizer, like, hey, there's hand sanitizer on the cart. Just try to remind people frequently and get people into the swing of just regularly washing their hands and sanitizing.
Yeah, and Cheech had mentioned that they're actually shutting down for a day to do their route setting operations. Anyone out there, any of the panels here, doing any cohorting with their route setting teams? It's another strategy I've seen a few different gyms use to limit interaction between different types of staff.
With our setters, we actually adjusted our setting hours slightly, so we start setting an hour earlier, and we have our gym opens later. So it's basically all of the setters that are in the gym, and that's it for the most part, aside from like 1 or 2 hours that it overlaps, but we're kind of in our own zone, and like no one knows that they're not supposed to really be in that section.
Have you increased the size that you're cordoning off compared to what you would cordon off for route setting pre-pandemic?
Actually, ours is like pretty much the same, because the zones that we set before COVID are pretty big, so we can still like spread out and not necessarily set on top of each other in both facilities.
Yeah. And in previous discussions, it seemed like everyone here had pretty much the same volume of routes up, more or less. A little bit of lower density here and there, but the workload hasn't really changed. So I think one of the strategies that that some of you have adopted are just setting routes a little less frequently. What are some of your new time frames for resets?
We've slowed down our turnover a couple weeks. Normally our boulders pre-pandemic would be up for about 6 weeks, and we're lengthening that to about 8. And then our sport routes were around 8 weeks, and we're pushing that to 10. And then we'll revise as we get usage information, find out what visitation's like. If it needs to go back towards what it was, we will. But if we find out if things are more grim than they seem and visitation is slower, we may have to adjust the other way. Just depends.
Yeah.
I can kind of piggyback on that, because we've been open in Texas for 8 weeks now, and we started out with just regular scheduled route setting, and the turnover for bouldering for us is about 4 to 5 weeks, and ropes is about 8 weeks. And to be honest, with less traffic in the gym and people just not feeling comfortable being in there as often, we actually were receiving some complaints that things were getting turned over too fast, which was a little bit of a blessing in disguise, because we were able to siphon some route setters to do other tasks, some maintenance oriented things, and tackle some other projects. And we just slowed it down. So now we're aiming for 5 to 6 weeks for bouldering, and more like 10 weeks like Cheech for rope climbing. So something to take into consideration is you don't have to be hammering that turnover as quickly, or at least we don't, is what we've learned. So
have you got positive feedback from customers after making that switch?
We'll see.
Yeah, right in the middle of it, still early.
Exactly, yeah.
Anyone on this call not change their reset schedule or turnover? Yeah, go for it, Jeremy.
So I'd mentioned I'm unaffiliated, but I've been consulting with OSO climbing gyms in Dallas, and like Summit, Dallas is pretty open, limited to 50% capacity, but hasn't really, the gym has a large occupancy, so it hasn't affected them very much. They've maintained a 4-week turnover of the entire gym, which is relatively quick to begin with. But also being a brand new gym, it's a little different. There's nothing to reference back to pre-pandemic. But the feedback that I've been here for about a week, and the feedback that I've received has been overwhelmingly positive, that it's turning over quickly. A lot of people, whether there's science to back it or not, people are a little, hesitant or concerned around holds being on the wall for extended periods of time. So I think it gives them kind of peace of mind a little bit, even if it's just anecdotally, that the holds are coming down and being cleaned regularly. So yeah, there hasn't been any change in the turnover here.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good point to touch on, and we've talked about this in previous calls. Just the idea of keeping your facility a little cleaner than it normally would be. Even at whatever great cleanliness level you are already at, and holds are probably very much of the same vein. That if people see some holds with caked on chalk and just a little dirtier, then that kind of reflects on the overall facility and might just increase their apprehension in general. So that's a great comment.
Yeah, I think it's mostly perception of for people.
Yeah, definitely. But every little bit helps these days, I think. Switching to that customer experience side of things that we just started to navigate to, I thought it was really great. That ended up being a part of the reopening guidance that we ended up publishing, and I'd urge any of the owners to kind of read through that section in our guidance. But it's important to remember, even gyms I think that have been open for a few weeks or a month, not necessarily all of your members have gotten back inside yet because they might be waiting a little bit. And it'd be great to chat a little on the what you guys have seen from your customers as they return to climbing, their different ability levels, the different levels of skill and risk assessment that they have, and how that's influenced your route setting programs. Yeah, and I'll pick on you for that, Sarek, because you've got 2 different facilities that you're looking at.
Yeah, so pretty much what we've done, because we for sure don't have all of the members back, and I think our capacity is still at like 10% in Boulder and maybe 20% in Denver, somewhere around there. So a lot fewer people in the gym. So we've spent a decent amount of time watching everyone who's climbing at like whatever hours, to kind of get a better idea as to like who's in here right now and like who we're setting for, and paying attention to what grades are like at like the peak of what our bell curve would be, because like we had that pretty dialed in before COVID. So it's like there's potential that might need to get adjusted, especially as like people haven't been climbing for the past few months or whatever else. Also on like a different note of like having a way lower capacity and like there are very like fewer people coming through is like we have a pretty similar turnover, but also the holds don't have like chalk caked onto them as they normally would, because there's like a lot fewer people coming through.
Yeah, and that might be interesting to touch on your bell curve a little bit too, and like where you're thinking that might trend, because that gym has a pretty wide range of skill sets that in your member base there.
Garnet, I wanted to chime in a little bit because we were talking about, I did a little bit of consulting on this subject just with some setters on the concept of like figuring out where your customers are at for them. So one of our big topics is kind of the risk that you're asking your customers to evaluate and deal with in the gym. And over time, people kind of get comfortable in the gym. They're comfortable with their climbing, they're strong or they're fit, and they kind of find their level in the gym and they're pretty comfortable there. But now people haven't been in the gym for 2 or 3 months. And so their kind of level of familiarity with the gym may not be where they think it is, which means you're kind of open to a situation where your climbers may not have a realistic idea of their strength, or they might not remember how far away the floor is, or they might not remember how high a certain wall is, or all these little factors that kind of go into the overall safety of the gym. And so with setting, we've talked a lot about kind of like making those decisions for customers again. So starting over and being like, okay, in addition to people not being maybe quite as strong and being able to just recognize, oh, I'm not as strong, they're not going to maybe remember how to fall as well, or like they might be overwhelmed by being in the gym, and so they might not be making good choices. And so one of the things we talked about was the setting department kind of working around or just extra considering the customer experience on all those levels as well, so you can provide a good experience for people that helps them get back into climbing. And I don't want to use the word safe, but with less risk if possible. Just try to mitigate the risk for folks at this stage until they're kind of back to normal again and can do that themselves.
Yeah, and yeah, that's a great point. And I guess likewise, like complexity of movement, people might think that they can do more than they can, or not remember how to reverse certain moves. So it could increase, awkward falling into other walls or swings. And yeah, it seems like yeah, there's a number of movements that could, put anyone at greater risk in almost any facility. So yeah, I think it's a great idea to actually like walk around your facility and have that discussion of where where you want to place the limits in certain areas, right? Yeah. And I guess you could lump injury risk in there as well. That's a little harder one to mitigate in terms of like overuse injuries, but going back to that complex movement side of things.
Yeah, and then you could bring that into the job hazard assessment section of the roadmap to reopening, which we've also talked about quite a bit. I don't know if you want to explain that to folks.
Yeah, no, this is a great place to insert that. And it also ties into some of the things that we were talking about beforehand around reconditioning, getting people back into work readiness, both mentally, just how to deal with equipment and the new safety protocols, but it can also influence, as we were just talking about, the risk assessment for how you want to run your setting program. So in our reopening guidance, we have a sample job hazard analysis form, and it's a very common method used in occupational safety settings to just document what you have talked about with your team and what your plan is going forward. That way everyone knows what the plan is and there aren't lone wolves out there doing their own thing. So as you reopen, you're making all these different evaluations on what kind of cleaners to use, what kind of changes you're going to make to your hours, your setting protocol. That's a great method to document that and have that discussion more broadly. So yeah, I'd urge everyone to check out again our route setting reopening guidance for a sample form. And then there's a lot of resources online as well. In the U.S., you can go to OSHA and they've got pages and pages you can read about how to effectively manage that process. And it's a similar process for anyone on this call who has been or whose staff has been through our Work at Height program. We use the exact same methodology there to manage just general setting procedures. Yeah, and yeah, it might be interesting to talk about just some examples of where you guys have implemented some new JHAs or job hazard analyses. I'm sure around the stripping and cleaning are two areas that are extra or require some extra attention nowadays. But has anyone out there done a similar analysis for, as Jackie was talking about for different gym hazards for the climbers? Yeah. And I think, in previous discussions, some of you have done things like, say, limit the height of finishing moves for certain grades or controlled where people are going to be ending and down climbing. So this could be an area, that could be an area that some of you might have analyzed in your own facilities.
Yeah, kind of as Jackie had mentioned earlier about mitigating the members' ability to not practice, what's the word I'm looking for? Or just not being aware of their abilities at the moment, and so reducing cruxes up high on boulders in particular, kind of reducing the distance of lateral dynamic movement, things like trying to take people out of compromised positions on the wall that could lead to awkward falls and dislocated ankles or broken ankles, whatever it may be. That's something we've been doing here at OSO is all the lower grades, so everything kind of about V2 and below is finishing 12, 13 feet rather than going to the top of the wall. And I've been really pushing to not have big dynamic crosses or anything that could send people helicoptering off the walls, just because people's level of self-preservation might not be there, or they might not just be as aware of their lack of core strength or their abilities. Some of their skill sets might have have dipped a little bit. So we're trying to make sure that we're not putting them in compromised positions that they could get injured.
Awesome. Thanks. And how has that challenge been for you, Kasha? Because you've got some different culture, gyms in very different locations with different customer bases.
Well, so far it's really been our Brooklyn location isn't open yet, so we haven't really dealt with anything there just yet. Vermont was pretty easy, I guess, is one way of saying it. Everybody up there is, pretty chill and laid back, so there wasn't really much of any, I guess, pushback, and everybody just kind of went with the flow of things. And we've only been open for it's been a week and like 2 days in the Boston gyms, and so far it's just kind of been a very slow, steady pace of customers coming back in, mostly members. And yeah, it doesn't really seem like people are really trying to push themselves that hard, just kind of mostly being in the gym for maybe 35 to an hour at the most. So I think everyone's just kind of slowly getting back into the swing of things.
Yeah, great. And was there anything? So yeah, there's the general culture of Vermont that made things easy. When you guys reopened that facility, did you we've talked in the past about the concept of treating the new gym set like you would a brand new gym. Did you guys implement that at Metro Rock, either Boston or up in Vermont?
I guess in a way we did that at all the facilities, because we did reset all the bouldering at all the gyms prior to opening. So for the most part, we kind of, how Chris was saying, kind of set the whole gym pretty much before we started running. So we were able to, I guess, and we did focus on setting things, I guess, easier than what we usually would. So I guess stuff might not be as sandbagged as it has been in the past. Mm-hmm. But overall, yeah, I think overall everybody just, I guess it wasn't really that different at the end of the day.
Good. That's a great place to be. I might, go back to you, Chris, since you've got a couple of months now under your belt. And I believe you said you did try to keep grades a little bit lower and treat the gym as kind of a reopening situation. How fast have you seen your gym transition out of that phase?
Not quickly. I mean, we're purposefully trying to keep it a little bit on the soft side. And, like Jeho was saying, just in general, we keep our easy boulders from going to the top of the wall, and but we're still not really, getting into setting skate moves or World Cup jumps and paddles and things like that. The member base at the moment doesn't really, it's not what they're looking for. They're just happy to get in the gym and do any climbing. And then, we haven't really touched on lead climbing, but it did occur to me with, we have a new gym ourselves at Big Lead Ball. Clipping positions was a big thing that we wanted to make sure when you're wearing a mask, it's shocking how often you put the rope in your mouth and you never realize it. But when you can't do that, making sure that there's nice clipping positions for that grade is paramount. And for us, actually, we try to make the clipping position a little bit higher than the draw, which may seem scary, but you don't have to pull as much slack. So if you have a nice jug, just pass the quick draw and you can clip at your chest or waist. We found that to be effective, and is helping people mitigate the risk of trying to pull out a bunch of slack and hold it under their chin and bobble and then fall with it or whatever. But we're staying the path of soft, safe, not safe. I'm sorry.
Low risk.
Yeah, low risk. Thank you.
Yeah.
So.
Cool. Yeah, and I think you're pretty. You guys have a pretty strict philosophy on that as well, Cheech, right? Clipping in front of your torso, a lot of clipping at the waist.
Yeah, we have a lot of considerations going into our sport resetting post-pandemic. Well, we're still in it, but I mean post-reopening rather. Making sure that the first few bolts that we're really getting people off the ground and that they're trying to minimize as much as possible the people of the chance of people decking. So like we already had a rule beforehand. Our walls at our sport facility go up to about 60 feet. So the first 3 to 4 draws, we try to shoot for like a full number below the target grade just to get people off the ground. That was something we had beforehand, just trying to really reinforce that and make sure that we're getting people further along before they might fall. Again, what Jackie and Jeremy talked about, like people might not have an accurate picture of their abilities. They might remember being able to do a thing, but then not realizing that they've been sitting for a couple months. In addition to that, something that I'm experimenting with sport routes is like trying to build in more of a solid rest in the middle, deliberately making it a little pulsy, but with masks and climbing with them on, like everyone's just sucking wind after a couple moves. So like giving people more breaks, seeing how that helps things out, whether or not there's more usage on those routes. Bit of an experiment. We'll see what it's like.
Yeah. Have you guys made any changes to your leads? Well, I'm not sure where everyone's chalk policies are at. If anyone here is liquid chalk only, but if anyone is or has new chalk policies, has that affected your setting for top rope or lead? Or everyone here has still got regular chalk for those activities, sounds like?
We are right now liquid chalk only, but for sport, I suppose the like risk mitigation concerns for me outweigh the like I guess in that regard, the possibility of someone running out of chalk high up and maybe having just having greasy hands up high. Like I'm more worried about keeping people off the deck and moving along in a uninjured fashion than I am necessarily about them falling off on a route because their hands are sweaty.
Yeah.
Like Jeremy and Jackie said before, like just got to look out for people because their self-preservation instincts might not be there right now.
Right. Yeah, one thing I don't think we've talked about on this call yet, and maybe I'll grab you for this, Sarah, since you have a lot of top out boulders to set. Have you added any new changes to your top out situation?
For the most part, no. We only have 2 top out boulders. Well, I guess 3 technically. Not everything tops out, like everyone was talking about, having those easier grades and lower. And then also being like a little bit more conscious of what is topping out where, so there's nothing that's like running into each other. I mean, we did that previously, but yeah, there's like not that much difference aside from like having a few more boulders ending lower than normal.
Anyone else have any changes to top out protocols, either making it easier at the top or just reducing the number of top outs like Sarah's doing?
I think if I were in the position of having top out boulders, I would definitely reduce difficulty drastically at the lip and just give people a handlebar jug just to get their bodies up and over. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're limiting their chalk use. If people are using strict or restricted to liquid chalk, you don't really need people. They've done all their climbing to get to the lip. You don't really need them greasing off and back flopping from their feet being on the very top of the boulder, essentially. So if I were in that position, I would personally drastically reduce difficulty turning the lip, essentially, getting on top of the wall.
We've got about 20 minutes left. I was just going to remind people to throw your questions into that question and answer tool, and pretty soon we'll shift over and get as many of those answered as possible. And I see some questions coming up in the chat too. Feel free to throw those in the question and answer area as well, and then we can get everyone chatting about that. Um, let's see. I think it's probably worth talking a little bit about the whole stripping and cleaning best practices. We've outlined some stuff in our reopening guidance. But yeah, I'd love to hear some of your guys' thoughts around stripping, especially whether you're doing it at different times of the day or implemented any specific strategies. Maybe we'll grab you first, Chris.
As far as what we're doing at Summit, I mean, we strip at 7 a.m. And you know, our mantra from day one has just been masks are on always, and we're washing our hands when we walk in the building, after we've done a task, and when we're leaving. And so far, it seems like it's working. But as far as changing anything about how we strip, we really haven't. We're just, you know, wearing our PPE and social distancing and washing our hands.
Yeah, perfect. When it comes to the PPE for stripping, do you guys have any specific mask requirements for setting or stripping?
We don't have like a specific requirement. Obviously, we encourage the N95, but we provide cloth masks for like, you know, if you're just regular sort of nurse ER mask. But we don't mandate anything more than that. And then they wear their safety glasses, but that was already part of the PPE before COVID as well. So.
Can I say, so for stripping, what we've been doing is actually closing down whatever zone that we're stripping that week for 3 days leading up to it. There hasn't been any issues or like negative feedback from customers. Again, I think they're just like really happy to be back in the gym. So that being closed off for a few days, like there's like no backlash to that. And it makes all the setters feel a little bit more comfortable, kind of tries to mitigate that risk like a little bit more.
Cool. Yeah. And what's your stripping strategy been, Cheech?
With the bouldering gyms, each night their cleaning crews are using those misters, so things should be disinfected if those work. So our stripping has just been similar to Chris's protocol: masks on, just the standard PPE, and with the hold surfaces hopefully disinfected with the use of those electrostatic misters. We're otherwise just stripping like normal. At our sport gym, though, we alternate sport lines that are open, and then the holds that come down, we're kind of caching them and letting them sit before they're washed. So hopefully we're not aerosolizing anything that might be live or active. So they're sitting for about 3-4 days before they end up actually being washed. But we've just got like a queue, like basket that's coming down today is going to sit for a couple days, and everything else just moves forward.
And are you guys doing a soak along with your cleaning process, or are you just doing the quarantine only?
Right now we're doing the quarantine only. I need to talk with our cleaning crews, see if we can't potentially use the misters there, just on the holds as they come down, and potentially just mist everything. But a soak, I think, would be more effective, where our setter closet holder room is not the largest at our sport facility. We don't really have much room, but I think we could probably figure something out. I think what Ty mentioned is a good protocol, and it's definitely something that I want to put more thought into.
Yeah, and just as a reminder for everyone, we got a lot of that stuff outlined in that reopening guidance, and then we touch on it in other parts of our reopening guidance as well, just for the general facility. What are you guys doing at Summit as far as cleaning goes, Chris?
We power wash outside. Person has to wear a mask, and we don't quarantine the holds. We take them down, we put them straight outside, and just power wash them. So. Okay. Ideally stay upwind of the power washer.
Yeah, and a mask.
Yeah, and you're wearing the mask, of course.
Yeah. Cool.
Garnet, did you want to just, or maybe I'll just say, one of the, you know, we realize this is kind of erring on the side of safe versus sorry, or with a lot of people's cleaning methods, but it just, at this point, there's still no real answer to how you can catch it that we've found, like, I know Garnet's done a lot of research. I've looked into it quite a bit. I'm sure everybody else here has as well. It's possible that you can't catch it from a hold that's 3 days old, or that is, yesterday old if it's stripped, but we don't know for sure. And I think that's why there's some suggestions for ways to potentially ameliorate the risk for our employees in these situations. And that's part of the JHA also, is creating what your facility feels is reasonable, so then you can execute those suggestions in your own facility.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, Jackie. Yeah, because it might seem silly, I guess, in some ways, that you'd expect your customers to be okay climbing on the routes for a few days without cleaning in between. But there is a different standard of care for employees. One of the other things I guess it's worth noting is as you read through our just general reopening guidance, you'll see this concept of the hierarchy of controls. And this is one of those situations where at the very lowest level, you can just have PPE to protect yourself. But if you can add some of those extra controls before that, it's just a better practice, and better safe than sorry, exactly like you said, Jackie. And yeah, it's definitely unclear right now where the actual risk is. The CDC, they're recommending, if you're doing like a quarantine procedure, 1 week. And I think, without putting too I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I'm sure they're kind of just picking that number because it's more than what the baseline is, and there's probably some factor that they have applied. And it's also just an easy number for people to remember, but that's the CDC's recommendation. If you're doing a quarantine process, like by their books, it'd be 1 week. But there are a lot of other effective cleaning strategies. As Ty mentioned, doing a bleach soak for holds seems like a pretty good solution. Doesn't seem like it's going to be damaging the holds at all, at least from what we heard from the manufacturers. Yeah. Let's see. We got one question in our question and answer tool. So if anyone's got anything else, just feel free to throw it in there. But I'll throw this to you guys around leading. Obviously some good ideas on clipping at the torso and having nice, safe clipping stances. Are you guys seeing your customers take advantage of the way you've set those routes, or are people getting a little crazy out there?
Well, we have lead climbing at Summit, so I'll chime in. I mean, I think it's essentially the same as it was before. More experienced climbers understand where the better clipping positions are, and those who are less experienced are really just trying to advance the rope into the next quick draw as fast as possible. So not really seeing too much difference in how the customers are interacting with it. But that being said, the bottom of all of our lead routes are, on the lower grades, very, very user-friendly. With all the holds are good clipping positions until you're 4 or 5 draws up, and then maybe the climbing becomes more engaging, where if you are a 5'9" climber, this position would be easier for you than that. But as far as how the customers are interacting with it, most of them are just doing as they did before. And some are learning, as they figure out they can't put the rope in their teeth, that it's easier to just go one more move and clip at your chest or your waist. So.
And what have you seen, Cheech?
I'd like to echo what Chris said. Yeah, the more experienced members have been they know to get into a slightly better position, be a little above the draw, or have it rather more at their torso than trying to be stretching out, clipping overhead. Yeah, we've noticed that people, for the most part, seem to be climbing how they were before, just minus the ability to bite a rope. So I agree with Chris, though. I think people will adjust to the process as this becomes a new normal.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else on here with lead climbing open? I think it's just you two guys. All right.
We've got another question in the Q&A about competitions. Chloe's wondering if anybody has competitions happening for the remainder of the year, and what your approach would be to setting those, or if you've thought of kind of like any formats for comps in light of COVID.
So we host Psychedelia every year, and we've kind of started to have a discussion on whether we're going to do that or not this year. kind of the idea of that. So setting for it is not really that big of an issue, but having competitors in the building, and especially a decent amount of them, is the issue, and spectators. Something we've thought of doing is kind of running like 10 people through the building at a time or something like that. Like obviously you're going to have a shorter window of time that you have to climb, but we generally have 10 boulders per category. So it would still be a decent amount of time to get through that. We're still kind of having that discussion, and it's not like solidified that we will be hosting that comp or anything. Also finals is a whole other thing that we're discussing. The thought of like having X amount of tickets to get into watching finals and potentially live streaming it or something like that. But yeah, we don't have anything kind of solidified or like guaranteed that that's going to happen. We could also be back into quarantine by then, because we usually host it in October. So hopefully that's somewhat helpful.
We're going to be hosting a youth competition at Summit. I mean, we have a gigantic youth program. We have Team Texas out of there and other like a junior competitive league that we call the JCCA. And so we're doing like a combined format where they'll do 3 boulder problems, 1 or maybe 2 lead routes. I don't think we've decided, and then a speed run. And we're doing a rolling ISO. The way the gym is built, they can enter on one end and exit on the other. And so we're going to host it on a Sunday morning before we open. And the kids, instead of ISO opening at 8, it'll be like U5, ISO opens at 8, and then at 8:05, once one kid's out, the next kid can come in. And they basically get 30 minutes in the isolation period, and then they move from one boulder to the next. And they're able to stay socially distant. And then we move them to the lead wall. They do their 1 trip up the wall. They do the speed run, and then they're out of the building. And I think we'll have a little overlap with opening. So I believe we're going to start at 7 a.m. The gym on Sundays for us opens at noon. The competition should be done by 12:30. But we won't have a bunch of people sitting in isolation. We're going to roll them through, one at a time and then move them on. And for us, the youth programs, like competitions, is kind of what gives them purpose. So without them, we're kind of seeing some kids dropping off and whatnot. And so we wanted to do something to keep them geared up and motivated. And this was kind of the best solution that we were able to come up with.
Yeah, we have the Dark Horse Series, and we actually had to cancel our championship round due to COVID. So we still have that technically. It is still postponed. We're talking about ways to potentially have the championship round kind of similar to how Chris mentioned, of doing kind of like a rolling ISO, pretty much the way that like bouldering nationals is held, to where you just have ISO and then you have a start time, and kind of same concept of only limiting a certain amount of people into the ISO and then just kind of having them go out 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, and just going through all the boulders. But honestly, I'm also just waiting to see what USA Climbing does and when they're going to host their comps, and if they're going to host them or not, because at the end of the day, they are kind of the biggest, business in the climbing world when it comes to climbing comps. So kind of going to probably follow their lead on, if they have a comp, then it must be safe, I guess, or yeah, people might feel like it's a good time to have a comp again. But other than that, like, it'll definitely be different. Probably won't be able to have crowds, any audience, no parents, no nothing. So I think it's definitely a different era of climbing comps going forward.
Our last question that we have is kind of a sadder one, and I kind of assume even that many of you haven't totally thought about this yet, since your head's been just in the initial reopenings. But with some gyms reclosing, have you given any thought yet into how that might impact your setting programs, whether you're going to have to furlough or lay off staff again, or how you might just manage doing the resets during those closing periods? And hopefully it never happens.
I mean, I
I think
think
it's
that,
oh, go ahead, Kasha, sorry.
I think yeah, hopefully it doesn't happen, but I think that's also probably in the hands of more upper senior management to make those calls. We can definitely be like, we don't want you like furloughing any of our setters, but at the end of the day, we can definitely fight for them, but they're always the ones making the final decisions. So I guess Chris can maybe talk to that a little bit more.
Yeah, I don't know what we're gonna do if we have to close. And Texas is probably gonna be the next one to reclose if states are. I mean, Florida probably should, but it's neither here nor there. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of looking down that road right now, and we don't have answers, and it's scary. And it seems like without another round of PPP funding, you know, the whole company will likely be furloughed during a closure. During the first round, we didn't furlough or lay off any of our route setters because to us, they're such a valuable resource. We didn't want them going, I can't be on unemployment, I'm finding another job, and then not coming back. So we left them benefits and payroll and everything. You know, I went on unemployment and all the route setters stayed on the company payroll. Second time around, I don't know if we'll be so fortunate. So I wish I could have an answer, but I assume that we'll be furloughing the majority of our employees.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the almost the most important thing is that the gym's still there to rehire people. If you permanently close, that's a whole different sad issue. Yeah, and you know, the Heroes Act's going on. I'll put a little call out there. You guys many of you guys might have seen in our newsletter. We just sent our new letter to Congress around the Heroes Act. Definitely monitor that situation and see what comes from there. That offers some financial assistance for individuals, but some potential business impacts as well. So we'll see whether anything is created out of that or not. It's up with the Senate right now. And for some of the Canadians on this call, you do have a little bit more support in areas than we do. So good for you guys. The last thing I might note, great comment here from one of the panelists on earlier we were talking about the bleach solution for cleaning holds and whether that damages holds or not. It might be a little too strong to say that it doesn't damage holds because who knows what happens over a long period of time that hasn't been fully tested yet. And then I'd also might add when we're talking about soaking in bleach, we're talking about a diluted solution of bleach, and the CDC has some guidelines for that, and we have those published in our reopening guidance as well. So that about does it for time for us today. Thanks to all of our panelists for joining us and all the great questions we had. Our next webinar will be next Tuesday as always, so we'll see you guys then. And as always, feel free to get in touch with anyone here at the CWA staff. We're always here to help you guys, or at least try to help you guys as much as we can. So if you have any follow-up questions, let us know there, and we can always have you know, more webinars for any other route setting issues. And so thank you guys once again. I'll hang out here a little bit in case anyone has any other questions in the chat, and thanks for all of your time.